Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to NOLA Theater Talk. My name is Alan Smason, and again, tonight is going to be a little different. Normally, we have guests that are brought in. We talk a little bit about theater. Tonight's show is actually going to be dedicated to the memory of Jim O'Quinn. And we have a number of Jim's friends and colleagues who are here. They're on hand to pay tribute to Jim's remarkable career as an editor and his inspirational work, which so many people had, been affected by, and also, of course, as a genuine human being, his effect on people who came to know and love him. So, what I'd like to do is just sort of set the way that we're going to do this. We're going to bring people in just once we have an opportunity to bring everybody in one at a time and introduce them, and then we'll have sort of the whole room filled up. We have several people who are still en route, not here yet, but they will be arriving shortly. And I'd like to start the ball rolling by giving a little bit of background. Jim was the founding editor of American Theater magazine, and he actually came to New York in 1978 as a student at NYU. He was in New York when Group TCG advertised for a newsletter editor, and that there might be a possibility down the road of starting up a national magazine dedicated to theater. And Jim recognized that he probably was the best person to handle that magazine's launch, as well as to shepherd what became American Theater magazine. And so he was at the helm until 2015. And then Rob Weinert Kent took over as the editor. And I'd like to ask Rob to come in now and make sure, first off, that what I've said is correct. I haven't made any errors. And
that's all correct so far.
Okay, and so now you took over in 2015 as the editor, but you, I think, had joined the staff in 2009. Is that right?
That's right. I started in 2009 as an editor there and a writer. I had freelanced for Jim and for American Theater as early as the late 90s from Los Angeles, and one of the great things I inherited from Jim and American Theater was an interest in theater. I mean, it's in the name of the magazine, American Theater. It's not New York Theater, even though the offices are based there. We actually have now our first remote employee. I can tell you that story sometime, who's in Chicago. He was hired before the pandemic, and now it looks like it was a prescient move. But in any case, the office is based in New York, but covers the whole country. So I had freelanced for Jim. And as Misha Burson wrote in a wonderful piece today, she's a critic in Seattle and was in San Francisco a long time. What characterized Jim from the start was his curiosity about theater everywhere, from Eastern Europe all the way to the West Coast to the South. And he definitely could be seen at some opening nights in New York, and I saw him around there. But he also traveled a lot. You see him at Double Edge Theater up in New Hampshire. Bread and Puppet Theater. He covered the whole country, and that was one reason which I think when I finally moved to New York after living in LA for a long time in the early mid-aughts, it seemed like I had the sensibility that was. I'll tell you this, the truth. I didn't know much about Jim. I knew his magazine very well back in the 90s, and what I realized is that he worked very much. He put his stamp all over the magazine, but it was invisible to the outside reader. You'd read his editor's note. They didn't have a photo of him in the editor's note, so I didn't know what he looked like. I had pitch stories. Yeah.
And just so that anybody, this is a shot that
there
I took of him, and it almost sort of impish looking, like he's got something up his sleeve ready to go. And I remember, I think, and we're going to bring Todd in a little bit. Was talking about how he'd do this little thing and he'd get ready to go to edit. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that. But again, I have to ask, I know I don't mean to interrupt your stream of consciousness there, but he started the magazine. You were affected by it. But for people who don't know about American Theater magazine, this is not a magazine that is filled with reviews, as you might think a lot of magazines. This is really, it strikes more to the heart of what is theater and what generates interesting theater and why we like theater, what there is that's so compelling about theater. It's really not a place where people put their opinions necessarily on articles that would give an idea about what a show is about, right?
So
I
yeah,
mean,
there's definitely opinion, and there's a lot of point of view, and I think that's one thing that's maybe overlooked about Jim's legacy and when I try to carry on. But they're not reviews of plays, and
right.
there's no way we actually would publish listings in the back of the magazine about all the plays around the country, but it's not a place you would go as a necessarily as a patron to find out what I should see this, partly because it was a monthly magazine, so it was impossible to do timely reviews in any case. Now we're online, and we're actually sort of pushing the boundaries of the way we cover theater, and the pandemic has upended everything a little bit. We're doing more pieces that are actually going to see work and writing about it, not necessarily reviews, but to sort of commemorate is maybe too mournful a word, but to put in print. I mean, this is one thing that theater journalism, whether it's reviews or features, is a record of an ephemeral art. So I think Jim always had it as a mission to reflect and record and report on the theater that, and often theater that we couldn't see because theater is inherently local, and you're in New York or you're wherever you are, and you want to read about what's happening in the national scene. And I think that the key thing is that, there was a national scene to write about. And the more he wrote it, the more American theater covered it, the more people had a sense of it. And people like Paula Vogel in Baltimore could read about it and dream about, oh, there is a national theater scene. It's part of it's in New York, but also my plays could be done in Chicago. My plays could be done in San Francisco. There's theater scenes everywhere. So, I know I've stressed that point a lot, but I can't emphasize that enough, that there's a sense of a national theater scene. And to do reviews in various markets, it wasn't a practical consideration. The other thing, obviously, or maybe this isn't obvious, Theater Communications Group, which is the publisher of American theater that hired Jim, is a consortium of theaters all over the country. And so they wanted a theater magazine to sort of be a trade magazine, a bit of a cheerleader. But I think what Jim brought to it, and we really try to live up to, and it's a difficult balancing act, is to also be a critical voice within the theater field, within, and to reflect the conversations that are going on, not always lead them, but sometimes lead them, but also reflect them and report them, the controversies, the calls for racial justice that we saw, especially over the past year, but really it goes back as far as August Wilson gave a speech in 1988, which was published in the magazine, was at a TCG conference. And that was a path-breaking piece that was litigated and aired in the magazine and debated. So,
and even the Douglas Turner Ward opinion piece that was printed in American Theater magazine.
Yeah,
I know that was there.
We reprinted it. You can't find it. It was in the New York Times, and it helped lead to the founding of the Negro Ensemble Company. But for some reason, the archive doesn't work. You can go to the New York Times. It came out in '67. So we, as a service to the field, we republished that groundbreaking piece, which still, I mean, you read it today, it's like, yeah, why isn't there a national?
Let me bring in one of your colleagues again, who worked with Jim, and who you know well, and that's Todd London, of course. Todd, recently, we were talking. You're now finishing a book that you've done, right, with Andre Gregory. That
it's finished. It's out in the world. Yeah.
It's out. So you birthed the baby. It's out there. And if you want to put in your plug for it, you're more than welcome to. But tell me a bit about because you really had a very personal piece that you wrote for American Theater magazine, where Rob's was pretty much about the effect that Jim had on the magazine, its launch, and being the public face, if you will, of American Theater magazine. You really were much more personal about his effect on you and other people who worked. So tell me a little bit about what you said in that article, and maybe reflect a little bit more on his legacy.
Well, first of all, I was lucky that Rob went first, because he had the responsibility of, really summing up Jim's career and impact on the field, and the importance of the magazine, which is there's nothing like it. I met Jim. I came to TCG, the publisher, to do a national project that involved meetings with artistic directors around the country. In 1986 and 87, it became a book called The Artistic Home. And then at some point, at the end of that process, we published an excerpt in the magazine I think Jim invited me in to guest edit an issue, if I remember, a Shakespeare issue. And then I was hired as the first managing director of the magazine. So we worked together through the late 80s. And I was really just a beginning essayist at the time. I hadn't really written essays. And it was Jim's encouragement and his real how do I even say? I mean, he just let me fly with all kinds of stuff. And he made some beautiful assignments of work that changed my life. I talk about that a little bit in the piece. He just had an incredible sort of deep respect for his writers and an amazing intuition about what people should write about. And I mean, so I remember actually, I didn't write about this, but the first time I had a cover line on the magazine, or a story I did, it was my first essay, and it was his headline was Theater and Addiction, and it was the cover of this brilliant article by Robert Coe about Cornerstone Theater's Romeo and Juliet in Port Gibson, Mississippi. And so there was a cover photo of this young high schooler, I think Idris, I forget his last name, Idrit. Brinston,
yeah.
And Amy Brenneman, who was a professional actress with the company then, who went on to, television stardom.
Sure.
And I've always just held that was my first AT cover notice and my first essay. And it feels like my whole life as a writer kind of spun from there. And it was all Jim. It was all Jim.
I want to bring in also another person who remembers Jim on the international theater scene. And I don't know that early on in his career, Jim had a lot of money that was expendable, that he could do a lot of traveling. But I think Philip Arnold was able to maybe change that a bit. Philip, tell me a little bit about how he was able to travel and what was your influence on him and his influence on you.
Oh, Lordy. I think his name first came up to me when I started working about 30 some odd years ago with Stacy Klein and Double Edge, and they were still in Boston and still in a church and maybe in their fourth season, second season. And I really fell in love with that company and was looking at the genesis of it. And one of the first things that Stacy did when she came back from getting her PhD and working with Eugenio Barba was to create a very early women's festival in in Boston, with Jim's first wife. And Jim was in the air. And at some point, we connected right after that. And I think I took him to Poland first. I was working in East Africa half the time and half the time in Eastern Europe. And we never got him to Africa, but he was with us at festivals and gatherings with this amazing ability to take in not just, he'd see 6 plays or 8 plays, but he would be able to understand the theater ecology of that moment in Warsaw, or that moment in Budapest, or that moment in Moscow. I remember when Robert L. Foti, the director of the National Theater in Hungary, was being attacked by Fidesz, and Orban early on testing his muscles, trying to get rid of this homosexual leading the National Theater. We sent Jim over along with Robert Avila, and Robert was embedded at the National Theater. he simply spent all of his time for 3 weeks watching rehearsals, watching everything in the repertory. And at the same time, Jim came over and looked at the whole scene. And those two pieces were published in American theater in the same issue. And I don't think I've ever seen such a vibrant lifting up and sharing of what this ecology of that theater was in that year in a very troubled country. Two more things. I did a project with 6 or 7 young Eastern Europeans called Beyond the Capitals. I brought them to America for a month. And we didn't go to New York and we didn't go to LA. We went to Baltimore, Austin, San Francisco, and New Orleans.
Mhm.
And I hired Jim to be my New Orleans guy.
Right.
So Jim and I made an advance trip together and mapped out how to let these people not go where the State Department would send them, but to go meet the folk. And Kathy Randall's, who you're going to meet in a minute, did a wonderful thing. We spent time with John O'Neill, who I went back a long way with. So
that was in 2015, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
2015.
it was the same year that I was the American Theater Critics Association chair for the Tennessee Williams. You can see but it was their conference here in New Orleans, and I was sorry that I didn't get to meet Jim on a more regular basis because at that point he had dropped a little bit out of the Theater Critics Association. But he was.
I do want to hold up a book.
What's that?
The last thing I did was when my dear friend and mentor Martha Quanye died.
Yeah.
I really wanted to write her story. We tried to get her to write her story. Edward Albee and I sort of teamed up, double teamed her, and then she had the first stroke and she never wrote the book. And we finally, then she had the second stroke and passed. And I asked Jim if he would write. I'd raised a little bit of money and Jim declined. Then I had somebody else work on it for 3 months. And I'd raised some money to do this. And finally, Martha's nephew, Will Wadsworth, wrote a chapter on the family. And it was so warm and wonderful. And I couldn't write it. I don't have any of those skills.
Now that's 5 volumes, is it not? That's 5 volumes.
It's now 5. Well, it turned out to be now a 5-volume set called Theater Diplomacy in the Cold War, and it's on Amazon. It's very cheap as a Kindle thing. But Jim was working on this. I had an email. I was sort of the behind the scenes guy, and I had this email trying to get Jim and Will together for a Hell Around panel. And Jim didn't answer my emails. And then he was in the hospital. And 2 days later, he died. So
I will tell you, Jim was supposed to appear on this show during this month. He was going to feel better, he said, and he was going to appear to start promoting this particular book or series of books with William. And I think William is located in Connecticut. And so we were going to work on that. And I said, well, why don't you get your strength up? And of course, ironically, he got worse and unfortunately did pass on. But I'll tell you,
No, I just want to add one little back note too. And first of all, I think it's our responsibility to bring Jim in tonight. Certainly, but in the days when American Theater started, when Jim founded the magazine, the aforementioned Martha Coignet, who was heading up what was then the International Theater Institute, had her offices right next to the American Theater offices on the same floor at TCG. So that arc of the international work that Philip is talking about, that ended his career when he was supposed to be just like chilling in New Orleans and enjoying life, and to work on those thousands of pages of transcripts and stories about Martha Coignet and this incredible force behind international theater feels to me like a lifetime achievement.
And the stunning thing is that, and boy, that's the way I want to go. 48 hours before he died, he was talking about, well, we'll get together and do this.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that was still, he was still in the game until the last 48 hours.
All right, Rob, Todd, Philip, I want you to stand by. I want to bring some of the ladies in who have been waiting, and Justin, stand by too. We're going to get you back in, but I want to be able to appeal to those of you who are waiting to see some of the fairer sex. And they mentioned Kathy Randalls. I'm going to bring Kathy in right away, and also I know we were talking. I know Deep's in here too. Deep, trying to work with Jim at American Theater Magazine.
I can't hear. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Amazing.
Like a bell. Yeah. Well, you know, you have a sound engineer person who could probably help you, I'm sure. And also MK Wegman, who's here with us as well. You know, I think I've got everybody in except Justin, and I'm going to get to Justin a little bit because Justin's got a lot to do with this program tonight. He was able to reach out to a number of people and help with the obituary. But Kathy, first off, I believe that we were talking about the international group that came in, and as she leaves, and I was wondering if she'd be able to maybe talk a little bit about what she did when Jim was in. Well, maybe in the meantime, Deep, while she's going off, tell me, you spoke as a speaker for our keynote address for the American Theater Critics Association. Was it possibly in Philadelphia?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Okay. So could you maybe talk a little bit about how you became a rising star in American Theater Magazine, and you know what it was, because you're now not with the magazine anymore, but you're still writing for theater. You're still very much involved in the scene. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you've done and how Jim affected you.
Yes, of course. I was hoping Rob Rob and I would share a screen, because I missed what
I'll bring him back in just a little bit. I'm gonna bring everybody back in, but I want to. It's difficult to get 9 people in. We sort of look like postage stamps. Okay.
I know, we don't want to look like a Brady Bunch, but yeah. Well, Rob is because Rob and I worked with Jim around the same time. I mean, Rob obviously worked with him longer, but I basically owe Jim my career because I was fresh out of college when. I'm hearing some.
Can you mute Kathy?
Other people's.
I can mute Kathy if she's making. There we go. We muted her. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, it's a sensitive. Yeah, it's a sensitive time, so I'm easily distracted. But yeah, and I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, when I applied for a job at American Theater Magazine as an editorial assistant. And I remember, like, it's so rare to be interviewed by the editor-in-chief of the magazine in your very first interview. But I just remember Jim being so warm and caring and so easy to talk to. Like, he quoted Tennessee Williams to me, like, on our first interview, because I had just been in Charleston for the first time and was talking about how everything felt so much slower down south. And he said the beautiful line from Tennessee Williams saying, like, every day is like a drop in the sea.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's just how beautifully Southern Jim was at all times.
Well, We have Brenda Kern coming up too. She's here, and she can talk about that. You know, that the capturing that little piece of eternity. You know, absolutely, Kathy. Kathy, you still okay? We're gonna see if we can maybe. MK, I appreciate your being on tonight too. Can you tell me a little bit about what that might be somebody else? Yeah, it might be somebody else talking. So if we can just maybe if you're not
Yes.
on, people.
No,
Yeah,
can
go
you hear
ahead.
me?
I
Yeah.
can hear you fine.
Yeah, well, I actually met Jim in 1970 when a production of Marat Sade here in New Orleans at a theater called La Mise en Scène, which lasted about 5 years, was raided by the police.
I know.
In a
I saw it.
And Jim was the cub reporter for the Times-Picayune, and he covered that story. And it was on the front page of actually it was the States Item, and it was on the front page of the States Item. And he wrote that story. And then he was a CETA employee at the Contemporary Arts Center, and he was our first marketing director at the Contemporary Arts Center in New Orleans. And then while he was there, he was producing plays, and he was playing piano for a club called Nobody Likes a Smartass. And he was sort of a variety show, and he played the piano for it. So I knew Jim during all of those times, and then he went off to New York. And he and I stayed in touch partly through Alternate Roots, because he was he gave, as was mentioned earlier, he was really interested in theater all over the United States, not just in the traditional capitals. And so he covered a lot of Southern theater, including a lot of the festivals that Alternate Roots produced over the years, showcasing the work of Joe Carson and John O'Neill and the Road Company and Roadside Theater and Traveling Jewish Theater. And so Jim has been a part of my professional life and my personal life for a really long time. And I was so thrilled when he came back to New Orleans after he retired from TCG. And he got involved in a lot of things here, including adjunct faculty at Loyola University, helping young people learn how to make careers in their music.
I actually was a reporter for the Forche High School senior, was it the Silver and Blue? And
yes.
I was the reviewer. I reviewed Marat Sade. I think the night before it got rated. Because I didn't get rated. But yeah. Kathy, tell me a little bit about, if you will, we can hear you fine. So don't worry about whether or not you can hear. We can hear you speak. So you go ahead and tell me about how you met Jim, first off. And then tell me, if you would, a little bit about how much he truly loved New Orleans and how he expressed that.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, y'all. I missed everything Deep Trend said, and I heard a little bit of what MK said, so I'll have to watch this again. Sorry, I'm coming half into the conversation. Yeah, I feel like I've been trying to remember when I first met Jim, because it's kind of a blur, but I feel like the first time I met him was he came to see our production of Lou Garou out in City Park back in 2009. And we were all like, oh my God, Jim O'Quinn is in the audience today. Oh my God, the founding editor of American Theater. Oh my God. So we knew that he was American theater royalty. And he was so down to earth. He was so Louisiana. Lord have mercy. Y'all know, his Northern Louisiana accent.
Yeah.
That we love so much. But yeah, that was when I first got to know him. And I feel like he must have moved to town shortly after that, MK. I don't know. Do you remember what year he and Richard actually moved back?
After he retired, it was around 2016.
Okay.
2015,
yeah. But he had been coming back. He had been coming before.
Yes. Well, he had owned a house here. He owned a house here. And he would loan it to people when they were moving to New Orleans until they could find a place to live when they got work here.
Right.
Deep, you're muted. But again, I want to bring in Justin Maxwell. Justin, also, you've got a little bit about, as I said, you helped out with the obituary, et cetera, and working with Jim's family. His daughter, who's the survivor, as well as his husband Richard, Jamie, the daughter. tell me, how you met Jim, and a little bit about, what you and he had done together.
Sure. I'm happy to. I met Jim originally in 2009 through a Jerome Fellowship through TCG. I was up in Minneapolis then, and part of that was to write a few pieces for American theater, and so that's why I got to meet him. And he was all of the great things that everybody tonight has said about him, and we quickly became friends in that way that people like me who are introverted and a little curmudgeonly and a little reclusive just sort of get adopted by big-hearted extroverts like Jim, and there's a new friend. But we also had a good professional relationship at the same time, in that way of how our personal and professional lives get intermixed in theater. And I, as somebody who makes some pretty out there plays, tried to make a couple out there things for the magazine, which Jim very politely rejected. And in fact, he gave me the best rejection letter of my career. He called me up and said, "I can't publish this. It reminds me of Derrida, but half of our readers won't want to read it, and the other half won't know what to do with it."
That's Jim.
Yeah, I'm still very proud of that. And I think I saw in Jim how to build this big interconnected world. We saw earlier with Phillips, showed up the one volume of that big collection, and I remember Jim working on it as we drove to Houston to meet up with some folks at the Alley Theater for a project that was happening in Poland and here in the States about Paderewski, which was a big passion of Jim's.
Yes.
And and I remember I was driving because Jim was a terrible driver, and so for both of our safety, I was driving and he was reading me paragraphs, and we were debating sentences, and it was a wonderfully writerly thing. And in some ways, I'm here because of him. I came to New Orleans for the first time because of a job interview, but I had a first round job interview for this MFA program at the University of New Orleans, and I was in New York meeting up with Jim and other folks. And I said, "So I know you're from Louisiana. What do you know about this school? Blah, blah, blah. Can you give me any insight?" And he said, "I went there. Have you met so-and-so yet? She was a mentor to me." Carol Gelderman was her name. She was
Yes.
A faculty member up until Katrina, and then she retired. And so I said, "No, I have not met her yet." He said, "Well, I'll email her some of your work and say good things." And the next day my phone rang and they said, "Let's fly you down." So instead of going back to Minneapolis, I went here and then flew home after a job interview. And the second time I was in New Orleans was to apartment hunt.
Wow.
Fantastic. Well, you know what? He did have that infectious love of New Orleans, and he passed it on. And many of us have that. Many of us can't get over it. We leave, but we always come back, it seems like. And Jim was a good example of that. He worked more of his life, I think, away in New York than he did, in New Orleans. Although he was in New Orleans for a bit. I know he was at a commune of sorts, like Marengo Street, right?
Right.
And he lived here for a while there. Then he moved up to New York to go to school. Then he stayed up there, to be the American Theater magazine editor, and then he moved back to New Orleans 2015 all the way until today. It's only another 6 years, so much of his life was concentrated in New York, but he always came back to New Orleans and always was here. He had the house that connected him, but I think he was also spiritually connected to the city in many ways. Now, somebody who was not from New Orleans originally, but who has become sort of a resident here quite a bit from time to time is Brenda Curran. Brenda, you knew Jim, I think, first in New York, I would assume, right?
Actually, Alan, I knew him from a distance. I was a big fan. I mean, I knew his reputation at TCG and American Theater Magazine. But really, I ran into Jim at, I didn't, I knew him I didn't know him, but I saw he approached me at just before Curtain at production of The Mutilated in the garage of the CAC in
Yes.
I think it was maybe 2015 in I think it was in December, and you know, I was very flattered because he was just very enthusiastic about meeting me. You know, I came to think of Jim as the Pearl Mesta / Gertrude Stein of his function in my life. In fact, invitations, you know, just I had been. You're right, Alan. I had been coming to New Orleans. I had actually directed a theater program for the healthy development of adolescent girls. That was during a period where I had left acting, and then when I came back to acting, I did work for Southern Rep and
Provincetown Players, etc. Right?
Well, yeah, a lot of Tennessee Williams. So, of course, that's why I was seeing The Mutilated that day. And then I received an invitation for one of his parties on Congress Street. And I remember sitting on the couch with Kathy Randalls, who I had always wanted to meet. And actually, I think I met Justin that night. And, you know, Jim really was... Justin I just loved, Justin, what you said about his being a big-hearted extrovert. And, you know, I loved my talks with you, Justin, too, at those parties. And, you know, introvert to introvert, we do okay. But, you know, Jim, we had a very special meeting at Elizabeth's, and I remember he drove his pickup truck. Well, frankly, I thought he was a Yankee who had settled in New Orleans and had this very sophisticated, you know, house in the Bywater. And so it was that day at Elizabeth's that I learned his whole history and about his farm. And I had we talked about getting in that pickup truck and driving to that farm. And it was really a fantasy I cherished. I am just listening to all of you. You know, he was I remember how excited he was. It was just endless, his excitement about young people in the theater. Gabby Reisman, I remember he had just discovered Gabrielle's work, and he just couldn't say enough about all of us. And I have just, I mean, to listen to Rob, Todd, and Philip, when Philip talked about theater ecology, that's why Jim wanted to meet at Elizabeth's. He wanted to talk about, you know, how to bring all this theater activity in New Orleans, you know, how to connect it so that they weren't these sort of islands of, you know, 3 weeks of theater twice a year, all happening at the same time, but how we could all benefit by getting to know each other. So I feel very humbled by being asked to participate tonight.
Well, we're glad to have you. Yeah. We think you add to the conversation. I'm going to bring the gentleman back in who we started off the evening with, so that we have a full house. I mean, this is the definite Brady Bunch shots now, for sure. We can look down at each other and wave. So anyway, main thing is that I'd like everybody, and I know I didn't give Deep a lot of time to talk. I know you're still on mute, Deep, but and Todd and Rob as well. So make yourselves available. I'd like to get, if you will, a favorite memory, and I'm going to start with Kathy. We're just going to go around. Kathy and then MK, and then we'll do Deep, and then Justin, and then Brenda, and then finally finish up towards the end there with the gentleman at the bottom. So let's go with your favorite memory of Jim, if you would, please, Kathy.
Yes, sir. Okay. So it was at one of my birthday parties here at my house on North Worship Lane in New Orleans. And it was towards the end of the party. And Mr. O'Quinn, I had heard that Jim played the piano, but I had never heard him play the piano. And I had heard that he used to play, accompany his church on the hymns. And he grew up Southern Baptist in Colfax, Louisiana, with a scary history that we're gonna go there. All right. Can we commit to that? We're going to Colfax. All right.
Yes.
There's work to be done in Colfax that Jim really wanted to do. Yes, the Klan was heavily active there. Okay, I'll hurry up. Sorry.
Speaking of ecology,
hymns on my piano in my house, and I knew all of them. And we sat there for like 20 minutes, and the people at my party were like, and we sang Baptist hymns together, and soulmates forevermore after that. And I want to
that was not meant to hurry you up. I just was going to say, of ecology, maybe we could plant a tree in his honor on the farm with permission and in his name. So go ahead.
I just want to send special love out to Jamie and Richard right now.
Yeah.
Very good. MK, a special favorite memory of yours, if you would share, please.
There are many memories of sitting on my balcony, which is the corner of Charters and Frenchman, and drink in hand, greeting people, and the evening in my living room when the project that Phil Arnaud talked about, because I was part of the group with Kathy Randalls that went to Russia following the visit of the Russian theater professionals to New Orleans. And just that opportunity to just hang with Jim and his infectious laugh, and of course that gesture of his. I think that is my favorite memory of his excitement.
Very good. Okay, Deep, it'll be your turn now.
Yeah, I mean, I can't go into detail about this because it concerns Jamie and Jim's ex-wife, but I just remember like the first time I ever went to the theater with Jim, he took me, and this is how I knew like he was a very easy person to talk to and very open about sharing, and I could really like give any ideas I had. Was he told me the story of how he grew up in New Orleans and how he got married and then how he got divorced and how he met Richard, and it was all in the span of a 20-minute walk to the theater, which I can't go into detail very much, but this was within the first 6 months of me meeting Jim, and I thought, wow, it's we share on this step.
Justin.
Yeah.
Do you have a special memory you want to share real quick?
I have a lot. And I'm not gonna. Yeah, I have a lot, and I'm gonna try to talk broadly, or else I'll cry. But I think the memory's not so much one moment. It's as Brenda sort of mentioned, all these times I would come into Jim and Richard's house, and they'd say, "Yeah, come on over for dinner," and I'd think, "Great," and I'd show up, and it'd be set out for 10 people. And I'd get there and I'd realize, oh, this is a whole big thing. And it was always like that. And just the constant, beautiful maelstrom of people who are joyful about the art we make and the life we have. It's just breathtaking.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to move to Todd now. Todd, you didn't do your book plug yet.
This is an impossible question, Alan. Jim was in my life for so long, so deeply. I lived on his couch when I was getting divorced. We were at a million parties together. Every book that I've written has mentioned my debt to him.
How about one moment when he was at the desk that you remember when he was doing editing?
Well, I'm not going to do that, but I'll tell you one thing that we've been talking about, his gesture, and yes. John Estelle, who was an associate editor, I think, of the magazine when I was there, reminded me that he often did it with his pencil.
Yes.
And John thought that he was trying to set the kindling on fire before he would sit down to his desk, which I think is beautiful. One thing I just want to, one memory too, that are together, because everybody's talking about what a party girl Jim was, and he totally was. He always brought the party. One was when we were working with NYU undergraduate students on a production of The Seagull, which we in Natchitoches, Louisiana, where Jim was from. And Jim was like the dramaturgy place expert. And he made this big vat of jambalaya for the cast in my kitchen then. And he always told the story about when Richard, his New Jersey boyfriend, came down to meet his family the first time and was asking about the food that they were eating. And he was told that it was squirrel jambalaya by Jim's grandmother. And Richard was freaked out, apparently, and just shocked. And his grandmother said famously, and I'm sure everybody on this call has heard this story, said, "I thought everybody liked squirrel jambalaya." It was a classic O'Quinn story.
Rob, would you care to share one more time?
Sure. And I know I should probably talk about something at the office where I worked alongside him and he mentored me. But I my most precious, it's one of my great regrets that I didn't get to know him better personally. Professionally, I owe him everything. Literally, I have his former job, and I'm trying to do my best to fill his shoes. But after he retired, I went to New Orleans for the Tennessee Williams Theater Festival there, and was presenting a piece there actually with some friends of mine, and stayed with him and Richard. And he was the most tremendous host. And I think that's what I would like to close my comments on. He was a great host, both at his own home, but in his magazine. I feel like the spirit of hosting an ever revolving party where everyone was welcome and he was really interested in what everyone had to say was the key to Jim in all his dispensations, personal and professional.
Well, I know Philip still has to talk a little bit about his memory. I'd like to, before Philip gets on, because I know he'll probably go off on a nice trip where he's going to talk about something. And if you're not, then think about one. But I want to tell you about my own memory was the time when Laura Hope, who unfortunately has a play that she's rehearsing tonight, but she was looking to do something. Loyola University was putting on a production of Caroline or Change conjunction with JPAS. And she thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could maybe get Tony Kushner down? And Jim just sort of picked up the phone and said, "Tony, can you come?" And sure enough, he did. And it was a wonderful, not really so much of an interview as much as a conversation between two people who genuinely love theater. And I mean, it was a mutual love fest for each other. And I believe Tony Kushner met Jim at TCG in the early days. Am I not mistaken?
Yeah,
that they were working together.
Tony was the director of literary services there for a short time in the 80s when Jim, And
so my favorite moment was seeing Jim in his heyday, if you will, being the host that he is and being the gregarious person that he was, and also being so knowledgeable and just sharing this wealth of information, and the two of them going back and forth with one another. So I hope that didn't upstage you, Philip, but I'd like to hear your memory now.
It's a little time. No. Jim and I had a 30-year conversation, and it just really seemed like we could pick up and start talking about things no matter what continent we were on. But the one moment I remember was being in Hungary with Jim, and it was one of the last trips that he made there, and I was telling him about the 1976 festival that I did in Baltimore called the Tnt Festival. And I brought this company, I brought 36 companies. I did it with Herbert Blau. 5 of them were from New York. 5 were international. and the rest were from the rest of America. One of the international companies was Squat Theater.
Oh my God.
And
Wow.
after the performance, and it's all down, and I'm back in my office on Preston Street, I get a phone call, and Squat is asking for political asylum. And they asked me if these were, and I think it was the ladies' auxiliary of something, because they wanted to know if these were fine, upstanding Hungarians. And I said, oh, yes, yes, yes. And they stayed in America. And I'm telling this story because this long arc of a conversation that lasted for 30 years with Jim, we're getting into this crevice. And Jim stops me and tells me that before TCG, when he was a young man, he organized all of the archives of Squat Theater. He knew more about Squat Theater when he was 21 years old. I'm only 6 years older than Jim, but he knew more about Squat Theater than anybody else in America from that early day. And that was just one more solid connection that lasted until last week and probably is not going to stop. I think we all carry those moments with us.
I think if there's one thing that is constant between all of us is that we all were very impressed by him as a writer, all very impressed by him as a person, and also very honored to be a part of his life and to be the numbered few or maybe the numbered many who could actually say Jim is our good friend. Because there were far too few people who got to see Jim on a regular basis. I'm sure that many people in New Orleans got to know who he was, but in terms of nationally, not everybody could say that they knew Jim. And I know that it took me a long time to meet him, but I was so glad to have met him. And I think to myself how lucky I could have been, back in 1970, 71. I could have been at that performance of Barat Saad.
Yeah, you could have.
And Jim would have been there writing his review, and I would have said, "Hi there, I'm Alan. Nice to meet you." So,
No. He wrote the story of the police. He didn't write the review. He wrote the story of the police raid.
Yeah,
Wow.
and that was and I believe that was what Paul Werner from New Orleans.
Paul Werner was in that show. Yes,
he was Marat. He was
Marat. Yes,
yes. So.
I just want to throw one thing out. At 3:00 today, I mailed out an alert to 950 of my dearest friends in the theater around America about this event tonight. And that meant that in Eastern Europe, it was 9:00. And by the time we met, I think 400 people opened that and knew what we were doing, and I hope they're out there. But more importantly, I got 19 notes back to me from people that Jim met in Russia and in Poland and in Hungary who were crying over their emails about losing him. So he touched so many of us in this country, but he really had a global embrace wherever he went.
Well, I want to thank Rob. The piece that you and Todd did, you both did two different pieces for American Theater, and both were beautifully written, heartfelt. And if anybody hasn't seen them yet, they are online, and you can check them out. And I don't know, are you planning any kind of tribute in the upcoming magazine, Rob?
Well, I'm going to tell you, Alan, I did not plan this, but literally at my desk is the first issue. This is like there's a stack of issues sitting. This is the first issue from 1984. We're not a print magazine right now, partly due to pandemic funding issues, so we're online only. We have another piece by Misha Burson, another tribute that came out today. We're actually in communication with Jim's family about what kind of tribute there will be. I don't know. We also said we sent out a thread of posts by him, but our archives are not completely online. Anyway, the answer is we don't have a special issue planned because we don't really have print issues at the moment.
But when you do, perhaps when you resume, perhaps there'll be something.
I can't imagine we wouldn't. I can't imagine we wouldn't. Jim,
and of course, depending on the time, I guess, if it's a while long.
I mean, as I started out by saying, Jim's face and his personality was everywhere in the magazine. I came to realize when I worked there, but you would not know. You would know his name from the letters from the editor. But I feel like we owe him a tribute, especially if we come back in print. To the legacy of his career, and I really there's 36 years of magazines that he didn't just write the editor's note. He's got an amazing number of stories he wrote, features, and some of them he wrote after he left. He wrote a wonderful cover story about NOLA Project's flood. I forget the full title.
Flood City.
Flood City. Yeah,
right.
That was a cover story for us. So yeah, I mean, he was a joy to edit. And to as he was to be edited by. So, there's more to come on the Jim front from us.
Right. Well, what I did do, and those of you who are not from New Orleans, or maybe those of you who are in New Orleans and haven't yet been exposed to this program, know that we've used this platform. We started up back in April. Of course, it was the biggest April Fool's joke, I guess, because we started April the 1st, and I started up the NOLA Theater Folk group on Facebook. And because I wanted to have a place to broadcast to, I started to purchase the professional version of StreamYard. And everybody I would interview, I asked them all to please bring a drink into the room that would be a little icebreaker. And everybody pretty much has adhered to that and brought a drink in. Didn't have to be alcoholic, could be water in a fancy glass, but didn't really matter, just as long as we had something to share liquidly. And so tonight, in deference, I wanted to be as respectful to Jim's memory as I could, but I did ask a few people to take their opportunity towards the end of the show. I know Philip's got a blue label. Look at that. He's got blue label, Johnny Walker.
Johnny Walker Blue.
Yeah.
My
You're
brother,
fancy, Philip. You're
my
fancy.
brother gave it to me.
I can only afford Irish whiskey
80th
tonight.
birthday.
Jameson.
So I'm going to have a little Bush's. But if anybody's got something to go along with it, if you want to drink, I believe Bushmills is the Protestant version of Irish whiskey, and Jameson is the Catholic, right? So in any event, I want everybody to lift up a glass to the memory of Jim O'Quinn, and we'll never see Jim again, but hopefully if we live long enough, we'll see more like him, and that's all I can say. He was a jewel of a person, a prince of a guy, and I'm so glad that I got to meet you tonight as a result of unfortunately his passing. But God, what an impact he made on so many people, and he will be dearly missed. So in his honor, cheers.
Jim.
Cheers to Jim. Time.
And may I also
Go ahead.
To Richard Formoso's homemade ice cream at so many wonderful events.
Yes.
He was so much a part of Jim's Pearl Mesta, Gertrude Stein, and Alan. You reminded me of the Commune. I remember one night he was playing the piano and turned around and told us the story of his being in a commune, and.
Brenda, does that make Richard Alice B. Toklas?
It could actually be. For those that couldn't be here tonight, I've got some comments from people who actually came in and left their names. So Misha Barrison said that she was happy to be here and so glad to see us talking about Jim. And her name was mentioned earlier in the program. And Natasha Raymer came in and thanked me. Well, not me, Natasha. Thank them for coming. And again, she's saying she's drinking with us right now. And also, you mentioned Luke Garou, Nick Sly, who was a part of that production, Kathy.
Oh, yes.
Nick is getting ready to do a production that he was on the show last week. and we were talking about the new project he's doing, Ezel, Ballad of a Landman, which he's doing with Bob Martin. And so, Nick, thank you very much for the kind compliments, and we'll look forward to seeing your work very soon. And I think Susan Stroop also had a little comment. Thank you all.
Oh.
And I don't know if anybody knows Mark Bly, but Mark said to say hello. So we all thank everybody who made comments. And again, thank you to everybody who came in on the show. I promised I would keep it to an hour. So thank you very much for being with me. Ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude our tribute to Jim LeQuinn. And as always, I will see you at the theater.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Alan.